When the wind remembers us. The town of Amberfield always looked most beautiful in October. The maples turned the color of fire, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and rain, and the river carried fallen leaves downstream like slow-moving lanterns. Tourists came from miles away to see the festival lights strung across Main Street, to taste the cider, and to watch the first bonfire of the season crackle beside the old train bridge. But to Grace Bennett, Amberfield wasn't about festivals or postcards. It was home, and lately, it felt quieter than it used to. Every morning, she walked the same path from her small apartment above the library to the town bakery, where she worked part-time. The route took her through Market Square, past the antique shop that always smelled of dust and lavender, and finally to the hill that overlooked the river. That morning, the sky hung low and heavy, the kind of pale gold light that promised rain but not yet. She carried her scarf close, the one her grandmother had knitted, soft brown with tiny gold threads that caught the sun when she moved. As she reached the bakery door, she noticed a man sitting on the bench outside. Tall, maybe mid-30s, wearing an old wool coat and leather gloves despite the mild weather. He was sketching something in a notebook, his expression calm but focused. A steaming cup of coffee sat beside him. He looked up as she passed, and for just a second, their eyes met. Something in her chest stirred, not recognition exactly, but the faint echo of it, like déjà vu in a dream. He smiled, polite, brief, then looked back to his sketch. She went inside, brushing off the thought, though she found herself glancing at the window twice while preparing pastries. Each time, he was still there, his pencil moving quickly. When she left work at noon, the bench was empty, but the coffee cup and a folded piece of paper remained. Curiosity got the better of her. She picked it up. It was a sketch of the bakery, its window boxes spilling with marigolds, and the little chalkboard sign she'd written that morning, "Pumpkin spice muffins, fresh today." There was a note on the back. "Sometimes I draw what feels familiar, even when I don't know why." No name. Grace smiled, feeling that strange tug again, not quite romantic, but wistful. She didn't see him again for 3 days. Then, on Friday morning, he was there again. Same bench, same coat, this time sketching the river. She hesitated before greeting him. "You know," she said, holding out a cup, "I thought it's unfair you're always the one with coffee." He looked up, startled, then smiled, really smiled this time. His eyes were green, touched by amber light. "So now you're enabling my caffeine habit. Consider it an artist's tax," she said lightly, handing him the cup. He took it, fingers brushing hers, and the brief contact sent a tiny shock through her. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that reminded her she was still alive. "Thanks," he said. "I'm Noah, by the way." "Grace." They talked for a while, small things, the weather, the festival, the way the air in Amberfield always smelled faintly like wood smoke and rain. He said he'd come to town to find a place he couldn't quite remember. She laughed, thinking he was joking, but his eyes were distant, thoughtful. "Do you ever get the feeling you've been somewhere before?" he asked, "but you can't place when or how?" "All the time," she admitted, "especially in autumn." He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. From that day on, he came often. Sometimes she'd find him sketching by the river, sometimes on the hill behind the church. He wasn't much of a talker, but when he did speak, his words had a careful softness, as if he'd learned that silence could mean something too. Grace began leaving small things for him, a cookie from the bakery, a thermos of hot tea, once even a pressed maple leaf she thought he might draw. And every time, she found another sketch left for her in return. A quiet street, a reflection in the water, once even her silhouette through the bakery window. By the second week of October, the whole town seemed to take notice. "You've got an admirer," teased May, her co-worker. Grace just smiled and changed the subject, though her cheeks warmed more than she wanted to admit. It wasn't that she'd forgotten how to care for someone. She just hadn't expected to again. Her last relationship, if you could call it that, had ended quietly 2 years earlier, when silence replaced conversation and promises turned into politeness. Since then, she'd thrown herself into work, books, and long walks. She'd told herself she was fine. She'd even believed it. But Noah made her wonder if fine wasn't just another word for lonely. One afternoon, he showed her his sketches. They sat beneath the old oak near the river, a golden rain of leaves falling around them. His book was filled with pages of Amberfield, but not the Amberfield of today. The bakery had a different sign. The bridge had wooden rails instead of iron. The library still had its old clock tower, the one that had collapsed decades ago in a storm. "These look old," she said softly. He hesitated. "That's the strange part," he murmured. "I draw what I see, but sometimes what I see doesn't exist anymore." Grace frowned, flipping through. There was even a sketch of the train station before it became a museum. The details were perfect. "Maybe you've been here before," she said. "Years ago." He shook his head. "I don't remember." Something in his tone, the quiet certainty of it, gave her chills. As the days shortened and the air turned crisp, they spent more time together. They walked through the orchard trails, drank cider by the fire pit behind the cafe, and sometimes sat in silence watching the sunset over the hills. Grace found herself laughing more, dreaming more. Once, when she teased him about drawing her too often, he said, "It's not you I draw. It's the feeling that comes with you." She didn't know what to say to that. So she said nothing, and he seemed to understand. Still, the mystery lingered. Where he came from, what he was searching for. Every time she asked, his eyes flickered with hesitation. "I'll tell you," he said one evening as they walked along the bridge, "when I figure it out myself." The last week of October brought wind and rain. The festival lights went up anyway, strings of amber bulbs glowing through the mist. Grace and Noah walked beneath them one night, the streets slick and shining, the scent of roasted chestnuts in the air. He bought her a paper cone of them, warm in her hands. "I'm leaving soon," he said quietly. Her heart stumbled. "Leaving? Why?" "I think I've found what I came for," he said, looking toward her. "But I'm not sure I'm meant to keep it." The words hit harder than she expected. "You don't have to go," she said, more desperate than she meant. He smiled faintly. "You sound like you've said that before." "I haven't." He reached out, brushed a wet strand of hair from her cheek. "You have. Just not this time." She wanted to ask what he meant, but before she could, a gust of wind blew between them, scattering leaves across the square. When she blinked, he was gone. She didn't see him the next day, or the next. The bench outside the bakery stayed empty. His sketches stopped appearing. Then, on Halloween morning, she found one last envelope tucked beneath her door. No name, no address, just a single sketch of the bridge, covered in falling leaves, and 2 figures standing at its center. On the back, "Meet me when the clock strikes 7. The place where wind remembers." Grace's heart raced. She knew where that was, the overlook above the river, where the wind always seemed to hum through the trees like a song. At 7 sharp, she climbed the hill. The sun had set, painting the clouds in violet and amber. The air smelled of rain and smoke. And there, by the railing, stood Noah. He looked almost translucent in the twilight, or maybe that was the mist. "You came," he said softly. "I told you I would." He smiled, the same gentle smile she'd grown to know. "You always do." "What do you mean?" she whispered. Who are you really, Noah? He stepped closer, his voice low. Someone who once loved you when this town was younger, when the river still flooded the lower fields and you worked in the old library with the clock tower. I think I've been looking for that time ever since. Grace's breath caught. The library with the tower, the one from his drawings, had collapsed in 1972. But that's impossible, she said. Maybe, he said. Or maybe love just remembers better than time does. The wind picked up, carrying red and gold leaves around them. He took her hand, and it was warm, solid. If I fade, he whispered, remember that you're the reason I stayed this long. Tears blurred her vision. You can't go, she said. He smiled softly. The wind already knows the way. And then, he was gone. The air shimmered, the leaves stilled, and only his sketchbook remained on the ground beside her. Winter came early that year. The first snow dusted the riverbank before December, and the town quieted. Grace kept the sketchbook on her nightstand, its pages filled with places that no longer existed. One evening, she opened it to a blank page and gasped. A new sketch had appeared. The bench by the bakery. And her, sitting there, smiling. Below it, written in small, neat handwriting. Sometimes, when the wind remembers, I come back. She closed the book, holding it to her chest. Outside, the leaves whispered against the windows like old friends returning home. And somewhere between the sound of the river and the sigh of the autumn wind, she thought she heard a voice, quiet, steady, familiar. You found me again.